I got my degrees, went to Manchester University. There was a visiting professor there, Professor Howard Becker.
If you interview Howard Becker,
pegava o telefone e ligava para o Howie, né, como ele fazia questão de se chamar.
O Howie tocou com Lenny Tristano, que foi muito influente para a geração da Bossa Nova.
O Becker, que é o autor mais longevo, que chegou até agora super produtivo.
Conhecida pelo estudo das sociedades urbanas contemporâneas, pelo método etnográfico e pelo foco nas interações sociais, a Escola de Chicago influenciou a pesquisa social em todo o mundo. A tradição de Chicago está na origem dos estudos de comunicação. Mas no Brasil, esta perspectiva se desenvolveu com mais vigor na antropologia. Este filme explora a história, as linhas teóricas e os desenvolvimentos de uma perspectiva radical, para a qual as pessoas comuns têm valor. Os fatos banais são importantes, e a consciência de que em qualquer fato social existem muitos outros agentes além de um emissor e um receptor, como numa orquestra, como numa banda de jazz. Chicago, aquele local entre os Grandes Lagos e a Baía do Mississippi, foi chamado por seus primeiros povos pelo nome da cebola selvagem que crescia ao longo das margens do rio. Desde 3000 a.C., os Potawatomis habitavam aquela região e chamavam o local de Chicago, uma palavra nativa que deu origem à cidade que seria criada ali anos depois. Os primeiros europeus que se tem notícia naquela região foram um explorador e um missionário francês a caminho do Quebec, em 1673. 10 anos depois, jesuítas franceses fundaram o Forte de Chicago, um ponto de encontro de embarcações e caravanas. Esse assentamento teve acesso bloqueado pelos nativos em 1698, pelos constantes conflitos entre nativos e comerciantes. Um local de interação e comércio entre indígenas e colonizadores. Em 1833, depois do Tratado de Greenville, os nativos foram retirados daquele chão para dar lugar a uma cidade feita de madeira, que acabaria sendo destruída por um incêndio em 1871. 20 anos depois, uma metrópole reerguida em concreto e aço, que sediou a Grande Exposição Universal de 1893. Na exposição, um novo invento maravilhava visitantes: a primeira roda gigante do mundo. E a poucos quarteirões dali, uma universidade estava sendo criada, combinando o dinheiro de um milionário com a teoria social e psicológica alemã.
Symbolic interaction didn't exist when we were students. That was invented when Tommaso Shibutani and I persuaded Bloomer to collect his published papers, which were not so many, in a book. The book needed a name. So finally Herb decided to call it symbolic interaction. That became the label. Right? But I mean, we were not symbolic interactionists, you know, at all. I mean, we were sociologists. I think, frankly, we all thought that was what sociology was. You studied, I mean, the way I came to formulate it is you studied what people do together, how they do it together. The together is the important part. For my generation, it was not about politics, it was about methods. And the kind of research that I learned to do was simply to go look, talk to everybody, and write everything down so that you have field notes. It was a very simple method. And people, of course, then eventually I heard the criticisms that you're ignoring the larger structures which don't appear like that. So I said, well, if they're having an influence, I'll see it.
The Chicago tradition wasn't just about deviance and social problems. It was largely about work and about family life, leisure time pursuits, these kinds of things. It wasn't entirely about deviance. And in every single case, what you got was something like a social worlds approach. There is a world of the black American worker. There is a world, several worlds of deviance. Now, how do we define these different worlds? Now, how do ordinary people define those different worlds? One way in which they define these different worlds is that they had different kinds of language and different kinds of argot within these worlds. So I've done quite a lot of work on pickpocketing, and there are Chicago type studies on pickpocketing. There are Chicago type studies on confidence tricks. And with confidence tricks, you know, they talked about the mark being the victim, and they talked about actions such as cooling the mark out, calming the victim down, that is, after you tricked him and stolen his money. And there is argot and jargon for all these things. So one way in which people formulate their own social world is by developing a language that applies only to that world. So language is very much part of how people make sense of their particular social worlds. So communication studies clearly has a role to play. Of course, social order is really a communicative order. It was the Chicago people who began to figure that out.
Você não pode pensar a partir de uma crítica que se fazia de que eles não construíram teorias. Não é, para eles a teoria não existe fora dessa interação com o mundo real, com a atividade de pesquisa, sem essa mediação concreta, né, da vida social. Então, se você coloca de antemão a ideia de que tem que ter uma catedral do pensamento, da teoria, e procura nos autores e não acha, não, eles são bons pesquisadores de campo, empíricos. Não é uma outra forma de ver o que é teoria. Eu acho que toda a tradição de Chicago tem uma grande imersão nesse outro tipo de pesquisa.
It has made much more relevant today some of the ethnographic tenets, I think of it, which the ethnographic school of research of Chicago was influential in promoting. But it's really engaging with people in actual settings and looking at actual bits of interaction. And I think it's always been relevant because people have been interacting all the time. But really, if you want to get a fine-grained understanding of that kind of complex technological mediation and how this both rests on the usual ordinary sense of how we interact.
Eu li a primeira vez, por exemplo, autores sobre a vida urbana, o próprio Zimmel, e o Firth, o Park mesmo, me pareceram assim teorias vazias, quando você vai fazer uma pesquisa, você volta para esses autores e várias questões que eles apontam passam a se tornar problemas para você decifrar, digamos assim, com o seu material etnográfico. Então, me surpreendeu muito quando eu fui reler, ou como eu disse, o William Footwhite, A Sociedade de Esquina, à luz do meu campo na área de antropologia política, e perceber que tinha ali, e eu continuo descobrindo nesse livro, aliás, uma quantidade de ferramentas metodológicas, ferramentas de pensamento para lidar com o concreto da pesquisa etnográfica, lidar com pessoas.
Firstly, there's a resistance towards theory-formed descriptions of the society which are a priori, which are assumed rather than demonstrated. Secondly, as I said before too, there are concerns and serious concerns to take into account how ordinary society members, in any circumstances, how they describe those circumstances, how they define those circumstances, how they make sense of those circumstances. So we are trying to take people's definitions into account there, because people act on the basis of their definitions. They don't act on the basis of sociological theories. So that is what we want to do. Now, conventional sociology, by contrast, first of all, works very much more a prioristically. It brings a lot of a priori conceptions and preconceptions about what sociology looks like. And secondly, conventional sociologies, they tend to ignore or even actively seek to undermine how ordinary people see their circumstances. They tend to say that ordinary people misunderstand their circumstances. They have an ideological view of those circumstances.
It's about reasoning from cases. It's about how you start from a very specific case study. Because this is what people always say. Well, you've just got one case. What do you do with that?
8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Somebody criticizing Diane Vaughan's magnificent book about when the spaceship blew up, the Challenger. She wrote this fabulous book, and somebody said, well, you've only got one case. And this was not a stupid person who said it. He said a stupid thing. And I think there's a misconception that lies behind a question like that. The misconception is that you're trying to generalize about this class of objects.
Side of the shuttle in an explosion.
One of the chapters in the book, for instance, is an old paper I wrote on consciousness and drug effects. How the way you think about a drug and its effects influences what you actually experience. So I wrote that paper in, I don't know, in the 70s probably, and it was a reaction to the problems that were introduced when people started using LSD. What was going on? And what I do in the paper, in the book, is take that paper and annotate it. In other words, it's a section like this, and then now, after the fact, years later, I say, you see what I was doing here? I used this detail to create this kind of variable.
Well, the idea of thinking in variables is an idea that having an income of, let's say, $10,000, well, 10,000 is ridiculous, $40,000, roughly the median in the US, having that income means the same thing no matter who's around you. Well, of course, if you have a $40,000 income and you live in a community where most of the people have $20,000 incomes, you're rich. And if you live in a community where most of the people have $400,000 incomes, you're very poor. So the Chicago School insisted that you should not think that way. You should always think that the meaning of this or that property of an individual makes sense only in relation to other social units around, or has relation only to the past or the future. So to take the same example, if your income is $40,000 and your income used to be $20,000, you feel great. If your income is $40,000 and it used to be $80,000, you feel very bad. So it's just it's a kind of insistence on the locatedness of social facts.
I conceptualized it in a way that's very common as an input-output machine. This comes in here and it comes out the other side that. I mean, the most obvious cases are when people use social class position to predict voting or whatever, cultural tastes. Well, it's not like somebody puts you in a social class and bang. No, something goes on in between, and that's in a black box.
Até os textos do Howey sobre a história da escola de Chicago são interessantes nesse sentido de mostrar como aquilo, as pessoas tentam pensar que a escola de Chicago tem um pensamento comum, é unificado. E o que ele faz questão e que ele repete muitas vezes em vários textos era como era diversificado, como aquela era uma reunião de pessoas talentosíssimas, mas com talentos muito diferentes uns dos outros.
Development of American sociology had been centered since the beginning at the University of Chicago. I mean, it wasn't exactly the first department of sociology. There was an earlier one at the University of Kansas, not very important. But the second one was at Chicago, and that's the one where the American version of sociology really was created.
So the department was started by Professors Albion Small and Professor Charles Richmond Henderson. Everyone's heard of Albion Small because he was the first chair and so on. Small was out of the basically historical school of economics. That's where he kind of had trained. So he had written a book about the Cameralists. He was a person who looked at what would have been thought as institutional economic history in the tradition of Schmoller and Roscher and people like that in Germany. Henderson was a social reformer who was much more get out into the social world. Henderson's students worked in all different kinds of places. They really did the kinds of things that Robert Park's students are famous for, but they did them before. Henderson was an extreme activist. In fact, most of the members of the department before the First World War were reformist activists, often, like Henderson, social gospelers. So there's a kind of zeroth Chicago school. That's those people who start out. And that's when W.I. Thomas comes as a student, for example. It's also when George Rip Mead comes as a young faculty member. It's important to remember Mead was not a faculty member in sociology. He was a faculty member in philosophy. But it was a very small department, a very small university, excuse me. Everybody knew everybody, and actually, I have a student who's just written a dissertation about Mead, and they lived in the same apartment buildings, these people, sometimes right next to each other.
George Herbert Mead, I read him massively when I was young. I read Myself and Society, and he for a start, I think he brought in a lot of apparatus for the analysis of communication in social interaction. The notion of gesture and significant symbol, for instance, enormously important. The significant symbol, where I use a symbol which has the same meaning for you as it has for me. Of course, that provides the basis of communication. He was very, very good on symbolic meanings of all kinds and how these things developed, and how, above all, symbolic meanings were part of our interaction with each other. He had a praxeological view of social interaction. He looked at social interaction as a set of practices that I do towards you, you do towards me. You know, interaction is something, again, that we do together.
So the notion of looking always at the progress of time into the future comes very much from the pragmatists, because John Dewey was here in those days. John Dewey had brought Mead with him from Michigan when they moved in 1894. And so this focus on process, on looking to the future, always thinking about the future, that comes out of the pragmatist tradition and moves into sociology through Mead, who gave these courses, which people took all the time, sociology students took all the time, and W.I. Thomas as well, who moves that into the notion of life history and looking at the process of immigration and the way in which individual and society kind of fit together. So that stuff is all in place when Park comes. Park came because W.I. Thomas ran into him at a conference and said, well, why don't you come to Chicago and we'll make you faculty member.
W.I. Thomas, I knew his work through reading it, of course. Thomas and Znaniecki, and Florian Znaniecki, I think, was a very, very important guy in Chicago, a Polish aristocrat who went over there. I was told, I think, by Howie, or somebody anyway, that as an aristocrat he would only get up at lunchtime and wouldn't refuse to work at the University of Chicago, except in the afternoons. But Znaniecki was very, very, very important in talking about the cultural coefficient, the importance of cultural meanings and language and this kind of stuff. Thomas and Znaniecki really cooperated on the Polish peasant in Europe and America, reading letters from Polish immigrants and from their families and stuff like that. And I had cause to meet somebody who had a great influence on my life, a man called Edward Rose, who helped, in a way, Garfinkel set up ethnomethodology. And Rose had his own anthropological perspective, and he died early this century, aged 93. He had known W.I. Thomas, so he could tell me a great deal about Thomas and about how Thomas initially had found these letters from Polish peasants in a trash can, in a dustbin, in a back alley, and began to read them. So it was a complete accident that he found these letters. And Thomas, with his genius, found that there was a project there in these letters, the immigration experience, documented by Thomas and eventually by Znaniecki as well. So in that respect, again, we have written texts, you know, which are the object also of communication studies, of course, being there right at the beginning in the Chicago school. Because really, for me, there were people who came before, but really it was Thomas who began to really establish the Chicago school and establish the core concerns of that Chicago school. And he did it through basically sort of communicative objects, letters.
W.I. Thomas, especially after he was dismissed from the university for some kind of sexual offense, which was never quite clear what that was about. And then he used to come back, I was told, and give secret seminars on the campus. And he was, so he was kind of a mythical figure for us. I never met him. I never met Robert Park, which is something I really regret. Park was a much more lively presence for me because Hughes, who was my mentor, was very, very close to Park. And when I was working on my PhD, I worked out of Hughes's office. I sometimes, was in there working. And Hughes was putting together the 3 volumes of Park's papers, which were originally published. And so here was all these folders full of letters and drafts of things and all his work, including one day Everett found the original outline for the paper on the marginal man. It's like one piece of paper with the main points of that famous essay. It was like, it's like, oh my God, you're finding, the Dead Sea Scrolls or something.
The 20s, the department basically is dominated in a sense by Park and Burgess, who was a younger man who had graduated from the department in 1913 and then came back as a faculty member. And Burgess doing very much ecological studies at the time, but also Burgess was very interested in life history, and this is a side of his work that's not as well known.
We got used to looking at Park's view of the city, and although Ilya Neustadt was more interested in the concentric zone view of the city that Park and Burgess and other people had, he also made it clear that we should look at Park's understanding of people in that society. Park wanted to look at real people in real circumstances and to examine those circumstances as those real people defined those circumstances. The important thing was not how some sociologist comes along and defines those circumstances. That's a trivial thing. The important thing is how people in their own circumstances describe those circumstances and make sense of them in ways that informs their action so that they can adjust their actions to those circumstances. So yes, Park was extremely important, both in terms of the rigorous qualitative analysis that he recommended, but also in terms of his overall view of the city, the concentric view of the city.
So the first Chicago school is Park and Burgess. They're getting out into the city and doing the observational stuff. They are focused on social psychology and the experience of modernity, which is coming partly from Park and partly from W.I. Thomas. And they're also focused on formal ecology as well, sort of who's pushing around whom, who's influencing whom. And those sort of 3 strands of the department are kind of put, in a sense, into formal place during the first Chicago school period between 1918, let's say, and 1935 or so.
Now try and duck this one, you duck. Hail Hitler! Haben Sie geschieden? Hossieren! Gestock in alle zusammengestonk. Hitler geschwirkelgrubber. Ach du lieber, mein Herr, mein Pumpkin, mein Welt, mein heiliger
After the Second World War, what happens is, as happened in all the great departments in the United States, there was a backlog of graduate students who had been built up by the war. Lots and lots of young men who wanted to go on to education. The university system was expanding very rapidly, and they all had GI Bill money. So all of the great departments, the 3 really great departments in the United States at that time, Harvard, Columbia, and Chicago, all had an extraordinary generation of students right after the Second World War, just extraordinary. There were very few faculty in the department at the time. There were, I think, maybe 7 or 8 full-time faculty. So these guys did a lot of teaching of each other. And it's really that generation that conceptualized the idea of a Chicago school and began to talk about it, even though the phrase is actually older. It's probably the case that the phrase Chicago school was canned by Maurice Alboix, in the 1930s when he wrote a paper about Chicago sociology. But the second Chicago school, the group after the Second World War, is really, it's young people, they're hungry. In many ways, the leader, the faculty leader at that time would have been Everett Hughes. Many of them were students of Hughes. Hughes taught the fieldwork course at the time, and the fieldwork course consisted of, you walked in the first day and Hughes put his hat on the table, and he had pieces of paper in there with blocks on the city of Chicago. And you would reach in and you would pull out a block, and that was your block to try to understand. That's how they taught fieldwork.
There was clearly a kind of competition. Who was the true heir of Robert E. Park? Right? Because Louis Wirth thought he was the heir. Bloomer thought he was the heir. Hughes knew he was the heir.
Bloomer, I thought, was somebody who, well, in so many different ways, I think he helped us formulate what was different about the Chicago tradition. Hughes did that in a different way, but Bloomer, for instance, did something that I think Hughes was less keen on. Bloomer not only developed what he regarded as Mead's legacy for sociology, and did it beautifully. I think how he talked before about this paper, sociological implications of the work of G.H. Mead. That's a masterpiece of a paper. And the introduction to symbolic interactionism, the book, is also superb. But I think what Bloomer did that nobody else was interested in doing in Chicago, really, was to criticize conventional sociology. And he even criticized some Chicago sociology. He criticized Thomas Staniecki's Polish peasant study very effectively. But his main object was conventional sociology, especially sociology of the 1950s, the statistical kind of abstracted empiricism, as C. Wright Mills called it. And he wrote a paper called Sociological Analysis and the Variable, which is an absolute masterpiece and a devastating critique of positivistic sociology. No positivistic sociology has produced an effective reply to that paper today, and it was written 60 or 70 years ago. This is the longest silence in the entire history of sociology, in my opinion, and the most telling one.
On ne peut comprendre le rapport très personnel que Goffman a eu avec les malades mentaux de Sainte-Élisabeth, hein, c'était l'hôpital psychiatrique où il a travaillé, qu'en mettant son rapport à ces malades en relation avec la personne mentalement de plus en plus malade qu'il avait chez lui, qui était sa femme, à qui il devait toujours planquer ses médicaments. Et en même temps, il ne voulait pas la faire hospitaliser. Il connaissait la violence des hôpitaux psychiatriques. Et donc il était pris entre quelqu'un qu'il aurait dû faire hospitaliser parce qu'elle était souffrante, et il devait en même temps planquer ses médicaments parce qu'elle risquait de les bouffer et de se suicider. Et donc Goffman a vécu une petite dizaine d'années très très dures. Je pense que les épisodes psychotiques d'Anzalika ont commencé à se développer aux alentours 57-58, par là je crois, et elle s'est suicidée en 63. Donc il y a une demi-douzaine d'années très 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 dures pour lui. Warner l'envoie sans doute dans cette île pour faire une thèse de doctorat qui correspondrait à ce que Warner faisait très bien, c'est-à-dire des community studies, des études de communauté, comme il en a fait dans différentes villes des États-Unis, comme il en a fait faire à Kimball, par exemple, en Irlande. Donc, Warner faisait faire ça, ses étudiants. Et il pensait que Goffman, sans doute, allait lui faire ça. Et Goffman, encore une fois, va désobéir à son patron. Et il va dire, c'est à peu près la deuxième ou troisième page de sa thèse de doctorat, ceci n'est pas l'étude d'une communauté, c'est une étude dans une communauté. Et c'était une manière de faire un pied de nez à Warner, quoi. Et pourtant, Warner, lors de la soutenance, va accepter l'approche de Goffman. Et heureusement, supposons que Warner ait plombé la thèse de Goffman, est-ce qu'on aurait eu l'œuvre de Goffman ensuite? Enfin, c'est une supputation gratuite, puisque finalement, tout s'est bien passé. Mais ceux que j'ai pu interroger, notamment Anselm Strauss, qui était dans le jury, sur la soutenance de thèse de Goffman, m'ont dit que c'était un peu hard quand même, hein, qu'on n'aimait pas trop cette manière un peu arrogante qu'avait eu Erving Goffman de présenter une thèse qui, pour l'époque, ne ressemblait encore à rien. Hein. Déjà même le fait de dire, je vous fais, c'est le titre de la thèse, hein, l'étude de la communication dans une communauté insulaire, utiliser le terme même de communication en 52, ça n'allait pas de soi. Personne ne l'utilisait à l'époque, ce terme. Peut-être un petit peu en mass media studies, et encore. Le terme de communication avait encore à l'époque un S le plus souvent. Ça veut dire que ce n'était qu'un terme technique. C'était les moyens de communication. Mais parler de la communication, sans S, substantif, définitif, machin, la communication, c'était... Attendez là, qu'est-ce qu'il est en train de nous raconter? J'aurais réussi à aussi bien comprendre Goffman, hein, dans son intimité de jeune étudiant encore mal à l'aise, hein, et du coup, souvent, très agressif, parce que très mal à l'aise interactionnellement, hein, donnant les coups parce qu'il pensait qu'on lui ordonnait, alors que personne ne lui voulait de mal. Mais à Chicago, comme m'avait dit je ne sais plus quel informateur, on l'appelait Little Dagger, petit poignard. Donc il n'était pas sympa, quoi, hein, pas sympa avec tout le monde en tout cas. Hein, et on redoutait parfois son humour. Hein, mais en même temps, comme me l'a fait comprendre Bott, il pouvait être aussi d'une gentillesse, d'une délicatesse, et notamment à son égard, bien des années plus tard. C'est-à-dire qu'ils se sont séparés, mais ils sont restés amis, et tout au long de la vie, ils se sont vus.
As teorias sociais clássicas produziram entre o século XIX e XX um edifício conceitual que se mostrava sólido, com categorias teóricas e modelos abstratos que explicavam satisfatoriamente os fenômenos da sociedade. No entanto, algo estava faltando: a constatação de que quando pensamos na nossa própria vida, nas coisas que dizemos ou fazemos, nas interações que temos diariamente com outras pessoas, os sólidos modelos teóricos das ciências sociais não são assim tão parecidos com a sociedade que pretendem descrever. A tradição de Chicago busca estudar exatamente aquilo que as outras teorias sociais parecem fazer desaparecer: as pessoas singulares em suas ações cotidianas e os modos pelos quais elas, em interação, se comunicam e fazem sentido do mundo.
No século XX, nos anos 20 e 30, desenvolve-se, digamos, um contexto de grandes lutas ideológicas no mundo, sobretudo com a chegada do nazismo ao poder na Alemanha e a Segunda Guerra Mundial. E os Estados Unidos da América criam, digamos assim, os primeiros cursos profissionais de comunicação destinados, por um lado, a formar a opinião pública americana e a incentivá-la para o esforço da guerra em que se tinha envolvido. E, por outro lado, em desenvolver instrumentos de propaganda do seu ideal de democracia que pensava instalar na América e depois desenvolver pelo mundo a partir do fim da Segunda Guerra Mundial. E assim, a partir da Segunda Guerra Mundial, final da Segunda Guerra Mundial, desenvolve-se todo um trabalho com a criação, sobretudo, da Escola de Columbia por Lazarsfeld, como patrocinada pelo Pentágono diretamente, com grandes investimentos, para desenvolver uma tecnologia de propaganda eficaz na implantação do ideal da democracia americana, não só na América, mas através do mundo. E, em particular, no mundo que lhe é adjacente, que é a América Latina. E não admira que é em 1940 que, com o apoio da Escola da Colômbia, o Brasil cria o seu primeiro curso de comunicação, os primeiros cursos de comunicação em São Paulo.
The University of Chicago created in the late 40s, and I'm just saying that from scratch, I haven't really double-checked my archives, a committee for the study of communication. It started with Bernard Burleson, who was at the time the head of the library science, the School of the Library Sciences. And with a few people, that decided that communication was a new important study.
Esta pequena referência às origens dos cursos da América Latina explicam por que razão, quando eu começo a minha vida universitária em 1971 na Bélgica, na Universidade de Louvaina, a nosso olhar de europeus para os cursos de comunicação na América Latina era um olhar de alguma suspeita, de cumplicidade com, digamos, este esforço de propaganda americana e da sua imposição ao mundo. E daí que é só a partir do final dos anos 80, mais concretamente 85, digamos assim, na segunda metade dos anos 80, que nós começamos a estabelecer uma relação cada vez mais estreita, cordial e de colaboração com a América Latina e, em particular, com o Brasil, que começa também a vir cada vez mais para a Europa para formar os seus professores e os seus pesquisadores. Este é o testemunho que eu dou desta história, ao mesmo tempo longa e relativamente recente, da comunicação na América Latina e da sua relação com a Europa. Nós, na Europa, nos anos 70, quando eu estava preparando o meu doutorado, nos anos 70, nós interessávamos por uma comunicação na América que não passava por Colômbia, passava por Palo Alto, passava pela Escola de Chicago e passava inclusivamente pelos trabalhos da Escola de Frankfurt, da sua época, instaladas nos Estados Unidos da América, depois da imigração de Adorno e de Horkheimer para os Estados Unidos, fugindo da perseguição nazi.
I was invited to Brazil in 1975, I think, by a guy named Richard Krasno, who worked for the Ford Foundation in Rio de Janeiro. He was in charge of higher education. And he had met Gilberto Velho. And Gilberto told him he had read my book, Outsiders. And he would like to teach a class with me in Brazil. So Krasno said, no problem, we'll bring him. You know, lots of money. So he called me in San Francisco. I was teaching in Chicago, but this was the summer, so it was my vacation. And we lived in San Francisco. And he said, you have to come here to Rio de Janeiro right away. I said, no, I don't go anywhere in the summer. I'm in San Francisco, I stay here. And besides, I don't know even one word of Portuguese. I know how to play bossa nova because I'm a piano player. And bossa nova was like becoming very important, you know, for jazz players. But I don't know the language, I don't know anything, so I can't do that. So he said, we argued, and finally he said, okay, we'll send Gilberto Velho to Chicago during his summer vacation, and then you can study Portuguese.
Essa turma que estudou com o Gilberto, e a partir da perspectiva que o Gilberto abriu de estudo de antropologia em grandes cidades e muito todo aluno do Gilberto tinha que ler Becker, tinha que ler muito da tradição da escola de Chicago e depois do interacionismo simbólico, e Zimmel e todo o resto. É uma turma que interessa tanto para o pessoal de Chicago quanto para essa vertente da antropologia brasileira, que é muito original e talvez só exista com essa força no Brasil.
Nessa tradição do Gilberto, né, ele remontando, fazendo a genealogia, Zimmel, Park, Hughes, Becker, né, e ele, eu acho que a atenção aos processos de interação social é a pedra de toque. Muitas vezes se ouvia falar, por exemplo, no Zimmel como vendo a sociedade formada por indivíduos. Gilberto sempre corrigia, indivíduos em interação. Sem esse em interação, você não entende o Zimmel, não entende o que é o interacionismo. Mas era uma filiação mais em termos de admiração, eu acho, tanto pessoal quanto intelectual. Não que ele tivesse uma carteirinha. Nunca vi o Gilberto falar, eu sou da escola de Chicago, eu sou interacionista, simbólico, esse tipo de coisa. Embora fosse uma tradição que ele não só admirasse muito, que acho que foi muito útil nos trabalhos dele, e para a qual ele contribuiu também, para a gente não ficar numa perspectiva colonizada de que isso veio para o Brasil. Gilberto teve um papel importante também, contribuindo, principalmente através do Becker, do Goffman também, mas o Becker falou isso uma vez muito claramente numa entrevista, como que a questão do desvio, Gilberto teve uma contribuição original, que ele colocou a ênfase no processo acusatório, que era uma coisa que não estava tão clara para ele, quer dizer, ele tinha realmente uma admiração intelectual grande e era uma troca.
It was in 76, so it was in plena ditadura. So that's what happened. Gilberto came to Chicago in January, his vacation. Of course, it was freezing, and he almost died. He almost refused to get off the plane. He looked out, he saw the snow, and he said, what is this poor Carioca doing in a place like this? I should be at the Praia. So there he was, but he stayed for a month. He was very courageous, and he reminded me every day how brave he was. And and he sent me 2 books. His first 2 books, Utopia Urbana and something else. And so I knew I could read another language because I had taught myself to read French in order to read Raymond de Moulin's book on the art market. So I actually read the 2 books. They were quite interesting. I mean, they were very interesting pieces of anthropology, urban anthropology. And in the fall, I came to Brazil, and I stayed for 2 months. And we lived in an apartment in Ipanema, and it was pretty exciting for 2 Americans. We had servants and empregadas. And I was not used to this, living like this. And running around Ipanema with Gilberto eating rich pastries.
Vou contar aqui um exercício que eu fiz na minha aula com o Outsiders para pensar sobre isso e que me espantou muito a surpresa dos alunos de que sociologia podia ser tão simples assim. nós fizemos um exercício de pegar os alunos, acho que 40 alunos, e brincando um pouco desmontando o Outsiders, o processo de pensamento do Outsiders. Eu falei para eles assim, olha, estamos aqui todos juntos, somos todos alunos, mas vamos inventar uma regra para separar isso aqui. Uma regra que... Aí uma aluna falou, tem as pessoas que estão de perna de fora e as que estão de perna coberta. E aí, de repente, separamos a turma. Eu falei, e agora, o que a gente vai fazer? Agora a gente tem que criar uma regra para o que vai acontecer com essas pessoas, né? Quem que vai impor essa regra para ela funcionar? Todo aquele esquema do Outsiders que o Becker vai criando. E uma das coisas que foi, e complexificando isso ao ponto que a gente começou a viver o livro, fazer uma espécie de teatro do livro. Eu proponho muito isso nas minhas aulas, de que a gente pegue a teoria e tente fazer alguns exercícios práticos em cima dela, sem querer esvaziar ou hipersimplificar, mas para ver que a teoria é uma coisa viva, não é uma coisa que está lá no livro parada. Ela foi criada justamente porque ela foi vivida, quando ela é bem criada, na minha opinião. Então, uma das coisas que ficou muito clara é que para aquela análise funcional, para aquela sociedade que a gente estava criando funcionar, as pessoas precisavam se defender, precisavam acusar, precisavam se manifestar. E foi ficando também mais claro, eu acho que para a turma, o quanto que esses processos de comunicação, por mais, vamos dizer assim, sutis que eles sejam, como eles estão permeados de relações de poder, relações de disputa por espaço, e um conceito fundamental que eu acho que está em todos eles e que é o conceito de definição da situação, né? O quanto a gente está ali disputando por definir a situação, e essas disputas podem ser verbais, mas nem sempre são só verbais, né?
And we taught the class, and I met a lot of his students. It was a very wonderful, those years, he had many terrific students, and they all wrote books, and they all sent me the books to read. So by the end of a couple of years, I'd read quite a lot of Brazilian anthropology, and I met, people like, I met Roberto da Mata and Edson, Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, and lots of other people. I met Castro Faria, the grand old man, who told me all about when Levi was there, Levi Strauss, and he went with Levi Strauss. And so I got a good indoctrination in Brazilian anthropology. And then I went home and was, very excited by all this. And people kept sending me things, and I kept reading them. And 2 years later, Gilberto cooperated with a psychiatrist to make a huge adult education, continuing education thing, big program for 2 or 3 days. I think there were maybe 1,000 or 2,000 people attended, and they brought people from all over the world. Well, not from all over the world, but from Europe and North America. So people like Franco Basaglia from Italy, and Felix Guattari from here, and quite a lot of important people. And I was the connection to the United States, because they wanted to invite Goffman, and they wanted to invite Thomas Szasz, who was a famous crusader, and they wanted to invite a woman named Cher Haidt, who had written this book that was a collection of women's fantasies about sex. And I was the one who, they gave them my telephone number and said, if you don't trust us, call Becker, and he'll say we're all right. And yes, so Goffman called, and
Goffman didn't trust them.
No, well, nobody trusted them. Zaz called, says, "Are they good for the money? Will they pay for the plane ticket?" And Haidt was the most frightened because her book had been banned by the censura, and she didn't understand anything. Not a very, sophisticated person, and she was worried that who knew what would happen. And but I convinced them all to come, and then it was a very interesting event. I was in the Copacabana Palace. Still memories of Hita Hayworth and Orson Welles. And, it was very interesting. That's a long story. And Goffman managed to insult, Goffman managed to insult Gilberto Velho because Gilberto invited him in a very courtly, very formal way to, if he would like to give a talk at the Museo, they would be glad to welcome him. And Irving said, "Listen, if you want me to give a talk, tell me how much money you'll pay me and I'll come and do it." Gilberto was, was an aristocrat. He was so insulted. And he got even. He had a revenge. It was a wonderful revenge, which Goffman never knew because I didn't tell him, but I was there for a few weeks before and after. And Goffman just came and went. So there were big parties, and there was a big party with music and dancing, and there was a story in Ishtue about these big parties, and the story said that someone had observed Goffman grabbing the bunda of Cher Haidt. This was a scandal, but of course Irving didn't know, and I didn't tell him.
Dia da semana ele ia para a universidade, não no L, né, que é aquele elevado, o metrô elevado de Chicago, mas ele ia de carro. E aí eu ia de carona com ele e ele chamava aquilo de driving seminar. Era uma aula que eu tinha que preparar para ir falando com ele e a gente ia conversando no carro sobre o desenvolvimento de uma semana para outra, das coisas que eu estava pensando, o que é que eu estava fazendo ali. E então é esse ambiente. Depois ele se mudou no meio do ano. Eu continuei em Chicago, mas ele foi para Seattle e depois para São Francisco. Eu encontrei com ele nessas situações. Acho que também o interesse por música e por descobertas musicais nos unia, né? O piano dele e toda a relação que ele tem frequente com isso, de levar e de ele gostar de música brasileira. Ele vai, quando Caetano, Gil passam por São Francisco, ele vai aos shows, ele compra o ingresso e escreve falando sobre o que é, e de entender muito bem o que é isso, né? O Howie tocou com Lenny Tristano, que foi muito influente para a geração da Bossa Nova, né? Então, essas conexões e o interesse pelo Brasil, de saber ler português, de ficar fascinado com Antônio Cândido e traduzir os textos de Antônio Cândido e publicar um livro de Antônio Cândido na América. Isso, então, para mim, a escola de Chicago é isso, sabe? São esses... como eu posso definir o que é um cara que faz driving seminars e traduz Antônio Cândido de noite.
A teoria da comunicação concorrente que entende a comunicação como transmissão de conteúdos, veio a tornar-se a vertente dominante nos cursos, congressos e editoras. Entretanto, como teoria marginal, pensamento outsider, a perspectiva de Chicago continua a questionar a obviedade redutora deste modelo. A mudança de mentalidade analítica proposta pela chamada Escola de Chicago constitui um desafio para quem se habituou a lidar com uma ciência da sociedade fundamentada em teorizações abstratas. Esta mudança de mentalidade exige uma constante reinvenção e um contínuo foco nos fenômenos empíricos. A recompensa para quem empreender esta aventura consiste em um olhar renovado sobre a comunicação, um olhar que respeita as pessoas comuns e suas ações cotidianas e que, ao invés de desprezar os saberes de senso comum, faz deles seu objeto preferencial.